Welcome to Smashed Avo Property. Today I'm speaking with Bobby Haeri, who's a 30-year-old that's built multiple businesses that have allowed him to leverage into a property portfolio, and is now in the position to do what he loves every single day, which is to be a buyer's agent. Bobby walks us through his story, delving into how he's built his businesses, his portfolio, and even gives us some insights into the strategies that he uses to pay down his debts faster.
So that's just the one thing I really keep in mind. If you can bump your yields up from 6% to 9 or 10%, you can essentially, if you're doing P&I, you can pay off your mortgage from 30 years in 15 years. People don't realize if you're getting double the yield, you can pay off your mortgage twice as fast. So that's why I'm considering, not considering, but that's why everything I do buy does have that value.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Bobby. Bobby Haeri, welcome to Smashed Avo Property.
Thanks, Jordan, for having me.
Mate, it's an absolute pleasure. I've heard you on a couple of podcasts before, and I love your story, mate. You're a true inspiration, and I'm keen to share it with the listeners. But to get us started, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself and touch on some of those key points, and we can start to delve in.
Yeah, for sure, mate. So 30 years old. First got into property when I was about 19 or 20. I have 3 businesses. 2 businesses are landscape maintenance companies, where that I'm quite fortunate where I've had those companies for 10 years. They employ 8 staff, and it's allowed me to, I guess, take a step back and focus on other aspects of my life. So I'm quite passive in terms of that in that regards now, and that's allowed me to start my 3rd company, which is the investors agency, a buyer's agency where I first started it just to help investors all around Australia find investment properties. It's sort of something that I've got about 10 years experience on a personal level. But I have helped a few clients in the owner-occupied space on the northern beaches, and I probably enjoyed that a little bit more, to be honest. There's a lot more emotion. Like when you take someone through their house and it's their house for them to live in, and their eyes light up, and it's the perfect property. That feeling you get is a bit more fulfilling than the investment side of things. But the real reason why I started the company is to help investors essentially escape that rat race.
Yeah, I can imagine it'd be like completely different when you're taking sort of like a statistics and cash flow and analysis and all that sort of stuff from an investor point of view to something completely different where a client walks in and, they want specific things in the house, and when they walk in, they see it, they love it. It'd be completely different. It'd be more satisfying, I reckon.
100% more satisfying, but a lot harder. A lot harder. Like the time frame's a lot longer. I had first home buyers who we took about 35 inspections, 35 different homes to find them the perfect one. Whereas an investor, you do all your due diligence on the computer, and you'll just go walk through maybe 4 or 5 properties just to make sure it is what it is. And they don't even look at the property. They're like, what's the yield? What's the growth? This is how much I can afford. Let's do it. Yeah. So it's completely different.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that is different. And that's dedication too, like 35 inspections. That shows you're so like passion as a buyer's agent to really get the property right. Like you're not just showing 1 or 2 properties and going, oh, come on guys, finally pick one. Like you're actually dedicated to the process and providing what the client wants, which I love.
Thank you, mate.
That's all right. So your landscaping businesses, how much of an emphasis do you give them towards building your portfolio? Do you think they've been able to generate a solid income for you and be able to leverage into the property portfolio, or how's that sort of played in your path until now?
Yeah, really good question. My landscaping businesses were purely a vehicle to allow me to continue investing in property. That's the only way I saw it. I saw it as if I can get another team on the road and increase the income by X amount, then I can leverage it to my next property. And that was a pure mindset behind growing the business. It wasn't because it's something that I was, overly passionate about, admittedly. It was just something I got into, and it was a vehicle that allowed me to get into property, which I've always been passionate about.
Yeah, that's really cool. And this is why I love talking to people like yourself, because everyone's got a different story, and a lot of people, they sort of start on the corporate ladder, then, they takes him a couple of years to get up to that, a high salary, then they leverage into the property market. And then once they've done the property thing, like, oh, well, I'll start a business. But you've actually done the reverse. Like, you've created a business, done the hard slog, generated that income from that side of thing, and been able to leverage that into property, which is really cool. And now you're in a really cool position where, you can really do what you want to do. And obviously that is being a buyer's agent. So that's awesome, mate. I think you've done an incredible thing there. But on the property topic, I mean, what really inspired you to get into property in the first place, and when did you start?
So I started when I was 19, and admittedly I wasn't very inspired to get into property. It's a funny story, actually. My sister and I were working full time but living at home, and my dad pretty much said, well, you guys are working full time and you're blowing all your money. I'm going to give you three options. The three options are you start paying me rent, or you move out and start paying your own rent, or the third option was we'll buy you your first property and you guys start paying off the mortgage. We weren't having any expenses at home, so we obviously took the latter option. And from there, so I didn't get into property because I had an interest in it. My dad pretty much guided us in that direction. But when you start seeing the results that it gives you, I didn't need much more motivation to get stuck in after that.
That's hilarious. And that's good. It's really handy to have not a leg up, but someone to push you in that direction. I think, my old man was the same. He sort of just, he was a real estate agent. So he pushed me into that. Like, he saw the benefit that it brought, and it was that really motivation that pushed me to get into the market and leverage myself. So I think, that's kind of critical for anyone's journey, really, is it's got to come from somewhere. It's hard to see, what property can actually do if you're not in there, you know what I mean? Like, you really got to take a step out and analyze and say, okay, well, other people have generated wealth this way, maybe I can do the same. So I think that's cool. And speaking of sort of the household and your family demographics and everything like that, was money talked about in the household? Like, was it always distilled in you that you had to save money and build wealth and all that sort of stuff? Or is that something that you've just done since you got into that property ladder?
My dad did mention it growing up. He did mention it, but you don't listen as a kid. You just don't listen. You don't get it. You're just like, oh, I don't care. I don't care about that now. I don't want to listen to it now. It's just, you want to do your own thing. But what I think had an effect on me subconsciously was seeing, I guess, my parents struggle a bit more. They had really well-paying jobs back in Iran, and then they moved here for us. And my dad was like, I remember one of the only memories I have from being like really young is, I'm talking like when I was 5 or 6 or something, was my dad would come home at 3 a.m. because he would be driving taxis till 3 a.m. And like a few times he'd come home and he actually, got abused, like physically abused.
Wow.
And you remember that as a kid, and you remember seeing your mum staying up because she's worried about dad coming home, all that sort of stuff. It has an effect on your subconscious mind. So even though money, I don't think was spoken about too much, I guess seeing your parents struggle, it does have an imprint on you. And I think that's why I've sort of gone in the direction I have done.
Yeah, 100%. It's all that the things that happen while you're growing up really impact you in the future. I mean, I've been through it too, and through the podcast, I've spoken to so many people who are in that same demographic, and a struggle is really the biggest motivator for anyone. Is you don't want to live through that, or you don't want to have to come home at 3 a.m. and be worried about, am I going to get abused while I'm driving the car? Like, that's crazy. So I think that's phenomenal, mate. You've done very well there, and
Thank you.
Obviously, your parents did help you out with that first property, but from now until where you are, and sort of maybe walk us through the journey into where you are, how many properties you've got, and sort of what age and how much you bought them for. But was there a harder part between now and where you are? I mean, was the next one hard to get into to generate some or pull some equity out and get into it, or were you pretty comfortable along the journey?
So I guess a mixture of both. I guess just to go back a little bit, we were quite fortunate that, like I said, my parents bought us our first one. However, for anyone listening, and I'm only saying this because I know how our minds work. I know we, as humans, we always look for excuses as to why we can't do anything, and we like to compare ourselves to others and look for, I guess, a bit of a escape as to why things might be difficult. So just keeping that in mind, even though we were lucky to get that first one with our help, everything my wife and I did after that was on our own, and a lot of them was with a cash purchase, not just tapping into the equity. So we were very fortunate with that first one, but if you cut down your expenses, you don't need the Smashed Avos and you cut down your expenses, you work hard, you do all that sort of stuff, then there's no reason why anybody can't do it. But in saying that, our second one, we leveraged into that. I think about 2 years later, we leveraged into our second property using the equity of the first one.
Nice.
Which was quite easy. And then finally, about a year later, we actually sold that property. The reason why we sold that one a year later was it was a small little red brick apartment and a small little red brick. There was only 4 units in that block, and one of the other units sold. It was comparable, and it sold $100,000 more than ours did.
Wow.
So we just thought, well, if we can sell it after a year and make about $100,000 on it, it's a good opportunity. Why not?
Yeah.
So we sold that one about a year later. Do you want me to run through the whole portfolio?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Sure. All right. Yeah. So we sold that. I'll run through it quickly. So we sold that one about a year later, and around that time I was proposing to my wife. So I used some of that money, honeymoon, ring, had a bit of fun, but then some of that deposit we used for after the honeymoon and all that sort of stuff. Some of that deposit that was left we used for another apartment in Brookvale, in Sydney's Northern Beaches, which we lived in there for about 3 years. And then we wanted to continue investing, but we were quite serviceability was getting, not serviceability, but cash flow was getting a bit tight. And I'm quite cautious about, like, I don't know about cautious, but I don't think there's any point in investing if you're going to affect your lifestyle. Like, for me, it's a 30, 40 year game plan, right? And you don't want to spend 30, 40 years stressing out about paying off a mortgage. And as soon as you lose some income, you're going to have to sell your property, or, we're expecting our first child in a month. What are we going to do if our properties are all like, thank you very much. Like, if our property portfolio was heavily negatively geared, what are we going to do when we go on one income? Sell the properties. So I was quite cautious about that. So after that, we moved to but we purchased in Grafton. We purchased 3 properties in Grafton. Well, we bought a block of land, did a subdivision, and we also bought a separate house. So we've got 3 properties in Grafton, and also 1 in Brisbane. So that's a quick rundown of our portfolio. Essentially, the ones in Grafton pay off Sydney. Mutually geared property portfolio. We're paying P&I for most of it. We're paying principal and interest, but it's pretty much mutually geared.
Nice.
That's more or less the portfolio in a nutshell.
Nah, that's really good. That's a really good, to be able to pay P&I and be mutually geared. That's amazing. It's a happy days. There's no like strain or, extra commitment that you have to abide to, especially when you're about to have your first child and go through that change of lifestyle. And I think, this whole sort of COVID period has really been a good demonstrator of that. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was really, and I still am, like, I still love capital growth. And I was kind of like, well, I'd never sacrifice capital growth for cash flow. And I think, if you only got one property and a small debt, that's fine. And you can service that debt. But when you start to build, sort of these bigger portfolios, like I just purchased my third and now I'm, $1.5 million in debt. And it's kind of like, well, for me to be comfortable, I kind of need cash flow. Like, I kind of need to be in that position where I'm paying everything off. And, fortunately my portfolio is mutually geared, but it's on interest only. So, even though I've just refinanced, I know that in 5 years' time, things are going to change and you have to be prepared for that. And I think, as I was saying, like this period really demonstrates that. Like, you can go through anything can happen at any minute. And, you do have to have those cash buffers, and you do have to have enough cash flow to come in to be able to service those debts. Doesn't mean go and buy, a heavily cash flow property just because you need to service the debts, but you do need that good balance. And I think I've come to realize that. Are you on the same sort of wavelength there?
100%, mate. Definitely. I think capital growth is what's going to, like, that's what we all want, right? Everyone wants capital growth, and that's how you're going to create wealth. You're not going to create wealth having an extra $50 or $100 a week in your account. But the reality is, unless you're a super high income earner, if you're only going to go high capital growth properties, after 2 or 3, it's going to start getting quite difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people bang on about, property investors only being able to get one or two investment properties, because they do, their serviceability caps when they're trying to pay for these high growth properties. And when you do the statistics, capital growth obviously far outweighs cash flow. As you say, you're not going to get wealthy getting an extra $100 in your bank account every month, but capital growth is what does the heavy lifting. But if you can't afford to hold on to it and you have to sell it, even within a 5 to 7 year period within buying it, like you might be losing money. So, as you alluded to earlier, it's a 30, 40, 50 year play. You just want to sit and hold on to these things and watch compound growth work over time. So I guess now looking at your portfolio and where you are, I mean, what is the goal? What do you want moving forward? Have you got a strategy in play? What's the next move?
So I did have a strategy to replace my income, but that goes out the window when you love what you do. So it was like, before I started the investors agency, I was like, I need my property portfolio to replace my income, by X amount of time. And then I was like, well, I don't like, and then, I started the investors agency, and now I'm happy to work, for the rest of my life. I really am. So I don't really, honestly, I don't have a strategy now in terms of my property portfolio. Everything I'm buying now, I do like value add potential, whether that be subdivision or granny flat. It's not something that I'll do anytime soon, but it can help with that exit strategy. So that's just the one thing I really keep in mind. If you can bump your yields up from 6% to 9 or 10%, you can essentially, if you're doing P&I, you can pay off your mortgage from 30 years in 15 years. People don't realize if you're getting double the yield, you can pay off your mortgage twice as fast. So that's why I'm considering, not considering, but that's why everything I do buy does have that value add potential.
Yeah, and I think that's a big commonality is, you can talk about cash flow and capital growth, but there's also manufacturing equity. There's also putting a granny flat on there. There's also, all these other different strategies you can go down. And, when people talk about diversification, that's a part of diversification, is being able to have different avenues where you can manufacture equity, you can generate extra cash flow and all those extra plays along the journey. So I think that's a pretty critical one to highlight. But what has been your most successful deal? I mean, you've walked through your properties, your portfolio. Is there one particular property in there that has done really well?
The one that's probably done the best is our Brookvale apartment. Just the capital growth it's had. It's only a one better. It's just a one better, but it's got a 90 meter square garden. Nice. So it's in quite high demand. Yeah. So and in Sydney's Northern Beaches, we're getting about 5.8% yield. So that's very high for Sydney, and just the growth it's had. So that would be our best performer over the course of the past 6 or 7 years. But that subdivision project in Grafton was a big success as well. That subdivision project in Grafton gave us about $130,000 on completion, but we didn't sell them. We're renting them out, and we're getting above 7% yield at the moment.
Wow, they're high yields. You've done very well there.
7%. Yeah, Grafton was a great performer, so we did very well.
That's awesome. No wonder your portfolio is neutrally geared. You got some high yields going on there, mate.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah.
So being the buyer's agent that you are, I mean, what are sort of the things that you look for in when you're assessing an investment property?
So for each person, it would be different. It really depends on what we're trying to achieve for that specific person. If someone's on $300,000 per year, we're going to be assessing the property completely to someone who's on a $70,000 per year income. So it really depends, but the fundamentals are still the same, right? So anywhere we buy, even in Grafton, right? You tell people you bought in Grafton, they're like, "Oh, Grafton, it's regional. Why would you buy in Grafton?" But what people don't realize is there's 4 or 5 industries driving that economy. There was very little stock on the market. Auction clearance rates were rising. Auction clearance rates were dropping, and all the numbers were really stacking up. So we don't mind going regional as long as all those fundamentals are there: infrastructure, population growth, supply and demand, and then vacancy rates, rental yields, days on market, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I feel it's good that you said that, because a lot of people, I listen to a ton of property podcasts, and some of them are so like bullish on, 1.2, $1.5 million properties plus, and you can't buy anything less because they don't have that, scarcity and supply demand and all that sort of stuff. And then you kind of think about, well, how do you start? How do you get into, the property market for anything less than that? And then, there's guys out there that don't buy anything that costs more than, 400,000. Like they focus on properties worth 200 and 300,000. And so I think it's so hard for people to really grasp what is a good investment property. Like what price point do you go for? What, should I buy $1 million property or 4 $250,000 properties? But I guess, you alluding to there, it comes down to every individual and their income levels and how they're able to, or what amount they're able to service. And if you can leverage into, there's really nice properties that are, been consistent over the last 30 years, then that's awesome. But, for the people that can only afford, 300, 400,000, there are certain properties that will allow you to leverage into the next one and the next one, and then get to that, $1 million property. So I think that's really critical of what you touched on in assessing everyone's individual circumstances. And what about your sort of risk? I mean, I know you're initially geared, and that's pretty less risky, but is there any sort of, risk aversion things that you're doing, or what are you planning? Is there like an emergency exit strategy? How does that sort of look?
Well, can we I'll quickly go back to the previous thing that we were talking about as well, just for anyone else listening. That land scarcity stuff that we're talking about, right? And getting capital growth because there's less land. Generally, that's the rule of thumb that you like to go by. But when we first bought in Grafton, we've had about 30% growth. 30% growth since we bought there, and it actually got announced Grafton's going to be one of the top 20 performers over the next 3 years. But there's an abundance of land in Grafton, right? So what do you do when you go into an area like that? It's about selecting the right asset in the right area. So look at where the CBD is in Grafton, and then look at what the demand for housing is in Grafton. Do people need a 3-bedroom? Do they need a 4-bedroom? Do they need a big backyard, small backyard? What does that demographic need? And it's about finding that right asset for that area. So even if there's an abundance of land, it's that right asset that's still going to get the growth and the consistent tenants. So that's just something for the listeners to be mindful of.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. And, when you look at if you take a regional town, for example, like there are assets that are more valuable than other assets because, they've been built close to the transport, close to the shops, close to, all the amenities, all these other things that we do investigate and look for when purchasing an investment property. There are particular properties that are on land that is close to all of those things. And, there's never going to be more land that's that exact distance from everything else. So in a way, it is scarce because it is in that, little segregated area, even though there might be heaps of land to build out further out. When you think about a town and town planning, you got to think about where all these sort of different areas integrate and play with each other. So I think you're pretty spot on there.
Yeah, thanks, mate. But I guess to go to your next question in terms of exit strategy, not really. I'm really so not necessarily for my property portfolio, but I am quite risk averse, and that's why I have several streams of income. Because it's quite concerning to rely on one form of income. So if I can have some income coming in through the landscaping companies, some income coming in through the buyer's agency, some income coming in through the properties, I feel like if one industry struggles, then you're sort of protected. And I think it's really scary that people are solely dependent on one level, one form of income, and that's all they're dependent on. Because if COVID's really taught us anything, that safe, secure job is not so safe and secure when unemployment rate hits 10%.
Mate, I could not agree with you more. Like I've been working for the same organization for 10 years and, some people that have been working there longer than I have been made redundant. And it's just, you kind of see that and you're like, oh, you'd never think that would happen. But, your job's just never secure. You know what I mean? Like anything can happen at any point in time. And I think that play of diversification doesn't also just apply to your portfolio. It applies to your incomes as well. And I think that's super critical. And I think, there's a lot of people that sort of double down on property. They start a self-managed super fund and they buy properties in that and use all these other strategies and everything else. And they just triple down on property. And obviously this is not financial advice, but, having that diversification play of actually having, some shares in a super account that, isn't going to be impacted. And if the property market goes down, at least you've still got some solid super and all that sort of stuff. So I love that diversification play and I think it's super critical.
100%.
So mistakes doesn't sound like you've made too many. I mean, what I was going to ask you actually was, do you regret selling that red brick unit that you bought? Do you wish you still hold on to it? And before you answer that, is there any other mistakes that you made along the journey?
So the red brick building, if we didn't sell it, it would now probably be double that amount. However, if I didn't sell it, I wouldn't have had the experiences that I had, with the honeymoon, with the wedding, and the ring, and some of that was used for our Brookvale property. So in terms of financial, we may have been better off if we'd held on to it. But do I regret it? Not really, because of the experiences. I think it's really important that we enjoy. I mean, I hate the word journey, but I think it's really important that we enjoy the journey. You can't just do everything that you're meant to do financially and be a Scrooge, if I can say that here. So I don't regret selling that. My biggest mistake, touch wood, it didn't turn out to be a mistake, but it was our first property. It was off the plan. It had the swimming pool, had the gym, had the big manicured gardens. It had all that sort of stuff that crazy amount of strata levies, and generally it's everything you're not meant to do with property investing. We did with that first one. Touch wood, we bought it at the bottom of the market, so we saw some really good results there. But that came down to luck. It really did. So I mean, that would have been that would have been the potentially worst mistake we had done. But touch wood, it turned out okay.
Well, that's the common thing, right? Like people buying off the plan apartments, and then they've got all these really high strata levies, and some buildings, when you buy at the top of the market and you buy off the plan, by the time they finish construction, they're actually valued less than what you purchased it for, and that's the biggest fear of off the plan. On top of sitting stagnant for 10 years and not growing at all, or seeing negative equity, like that's the fear, and that's what everyone bangs on about. So I'm glad you brought it up. But again, just back on your ring and the honeymoon and all that sort of stuff. Like what is life? Like what do we do? What do we invest in property for? It's all about retiring early and enjoying your life. And I think, regardless of the play that you have, if you can enjoy time now and enjoy that period of your life now, your honeymoon period, as if you're just going to sit at home and look at your properties grow, like wouldn't you rather go on a nice honeymoon and enjoy life a little bit and keep the missus happy with a nice ring, like that's what we do this for anyway. You know what I mean? So I don't think that was a mistake at all, man. I think you're enjoying your life and doing what you need to. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
What about resources? Is there anything that's kind of helped you along the way? Is there any books that you've read? Is there any podcasts? I mean, what do you like to delve into to help educate yourself?
Not many books in terms of property related, but in terms of self-development, there's been plenty of books. 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. There was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which was really good. Reading 12 Rules for Life at the moment. Jordan Peterson, I think it is. Peterson, yeah. So just general self-help books have been a big help for mindset. In terms of property, I think there's the standard ones. There's SPI. There's your one, of course. There's there's Property Couch. There's lots of good information. There's lots of good information out there for people. Lots of free information out there for people to jump on and educate themselves.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's, a lot of people do bang on when I ask them that same question about the property stuff and, listen to this podcast, read this book, blah, 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 blah. But I think, the self-help stuff is really cool too. Like I absolutely love it. And I think, in improving yourself, not only just in what can I do on my portfolio, but what can I do for myself to educate myself and get better and have a more better grasp of life, take that, get out of your body and have a look at your life and say, okay, well, if I go this direction, if I go that direction, and that helps you project further, I reckon, more than, reading a property book or listening to a podcast. But if you are listening to this podcast, it's good stuff.
100%. And just to, just to elaborate on that as well, like if you're not improving yourself and educating yourself, or just bettering yourself in all aspects of your life, and if you're not in the right headspace and mindset, investing is not. It goes hand in hand. Investing is not going to be related to you, right? If you don't have your headspace right, what are you going to do every 10 years when there's a recession? You're going to sell your properties and panic? Or you're just going to be like, no, we're all good. We've put our risk mitigation strategies in place. We've got our buffers. I've learned from the past, and you're not in a bad headspace, you can think clearly, and you just know it's a process that you go through with investing.
Yeah, I think that's a key one. Like, you got to see investing as investing. It's not a property. I mean, like, you are buying one specific property in one specific area, and it's going to have, come with all those due diligence items that you have to check. But again, we are investing to generate wealth, and that's the outcome. And generating wealth comes with an understanding of what markets are, what the economy is, how all these different things work, and educating yourself in that area, and being aware of not only yourself and how your emotions react to those certain circumstances. Like, there's plenty of people that you could listen to that are saying, oh, the property market's going to crash by 40%. And you can make a serious financial decision on that right now. Like, you could say, man, I've got to sell before the market crash. And that whole self-education piece and self-awareness piece is so critical to go, oh, hold on a sec. That's one person saying one thing. There's another person saying that property price is going to increase by 10% in the next 12 months. So, like, you really have to understand and take a worldly view of everything that's happening out there. So I think you're spot on there, mate.
100%. Thank you, mate.
Online tools. I mean, this is a typical one that I usually ask people. Like, I'm a big fan of, like, statistics and data and all that sort of stuff. And some people I ask have some really, like, new websites that I haven't looked at before, or shows them data. But is there anything else apart from, the sort of typical realestate.com, domain.com sort of thing? Is there anything else that you use to help you search for properties?
I use Price Finder.
Nice.
So that is I think it's owned by Domain.
Yeah.
It is the same research tool that a lot of the banks use. I love Price Finder because you can actually access, one of the tools on there is you can access every single splitter block in the country, whether it's on market or off market. And sometimes you have all the owner's details. Sometimes they leave their number on Price Finder, but if not, you have their address. So you can always just flick them some mail or give them a call and just try hone in on some really good properties that way. But obviously there's Domain and realestate.com, but Price Finder is what we mainly use.
Yeah, that's cool. I love Price Finder too. I've been in contact with them, and they've given me a bit of a free trial to play around with and use the data and statistics and stuff. So I'm loving it. It's really insightful. It's really intuitive. They've got some really cool, like, suburb flyovers and stuff, and you can go through recent sales, and it's kind of all in one place, which is what I love. Yeah. Instead of, like, going 100%. To like 10 different websites and trying to find individual statistics. So yeah, that's a really cool one. I love it. And I mean, you sound like a pretty motivated guy. You sound like you've got your head screwed on, but what does motivate you? What gets you up in the morning? What drives you?
Not trading my time for money.
Nice.
That's sort of what I think about every day. And that's sort of the motto I live by. I mean, that's the only commodity that we can't create more of, right? So I guess that's another advice to any listeners out there is try to stop trading your time for money as fast as you can. Now, whether that be through different businesses, and for everyone, maybe you can be a silent investor for someone else looking to start a business, shares, property, whatever it might be. I think it's really scary that I read this thing. I actually did a blog about this. Sorry, not I read this thing. I did a blog about this. 90% of people, or 85% of people, don't like their job. 85% of people don't like their job. So I think it's really scary that 85% of people are working until they're 70 at something that they don't like to do. Like, it's a really scary thought. So the faster you can, I guess, stop trading your time for money, that's when you can, I guess, appreciate life.
Yeah, it's crazy to think. And I think, this, again, I'm banging on about coronavirus, but again, this time really reflects that, like, with them printing money at the moment, like, it's coming out of thin air. Like, money is just being printed off the press like crazy. And essentially, it kind of devalues the money that's already in the system. And the way I think about it is like, well, if we're spending, if we break up our life, we sleep for 8 hours, we work for 8 hours, and then we got 8 hours of free time. Not really, but essentially 8 hours of free time. Well, you're trading, half of your awake life to work for someone else for those 8 hours for currency that's currently just getting printed out of thin air. And so I think you're spot on. Like, our time is our one commodity that they can't print more of. So use your time wisely. And I think people listening to this podcast will have that same sort of mindset because they are trying to build a portfolio and generate wealth. And but I think that's just a really good reinforcement. And I love it, mate. I'm so on board with that.
Perfect.
And just finally, is there any final advice that you'd give to the next generation to get started?
So I guess one would be not trade. Don't trade your time for money if you can. That's the end goal. But I guess in terms of investing, definitely start with an end goal in mind. And if you've already bought a property or bought a few properties, that's fine. But don't buy your next one until you have an end goal in mind. And then sit down and create a strategy. So there's a lot of people out there that will tell you, give us a call and we'll create a strategy session after 10 minutes. And that to me is not really a strategy because they don't know anything about your personal situation. They haven't looked at your books. They haven't spoken to your mortgage broker. They haven't spoken to your accountant. So my advice would be sit down with someone who can create a strategy for you, something tangible that you can look back on and you know exactly what your next steps are going to be. So if you're capped out, your strategy should tell you where your income needs to be so you can continue investing. Or if you've got a few properties already, the strategy will tell you, well, maybe we should subdivide if we can subdivide and sell a portion of it off. Or this is exactly how many properties you need and this is the sort of return you need to get to your end goal. It's going to be a really detailed, thorough strategy. And then you guys will actually be surprised when you have that strategy, you'll realize how easy buying the property is because you know exactly what you need.
Yeah, it's not a question. You already know what you're prepared for. You know what you need, statistically. You know what you need for cash flow. You know what you need for capital growth. And but once you find the property, then you just execute. And I think that's why it's so critical to approach someone like yourself, who asks those questions and goes through those scenarios and puts a property plan together and goes through all those risk profile, goal alignment, all those stages, rather than someone who is just trying to sell you a development that they're going to make a commission on. And I think that's that's what we're trying to avoid on this podcast. But I think that's why it's super critical to approach a professional like yourself. Well, mate, it has been
100%.
An absolute pleasure. You're a very bright mind, and I loved getting some insights from you. So thanks again for coming on.
It's been great to come on, Jordan. Thanks for the invite.
What an incredible conversation. I really appreciate Bobby coming on and giving us some tips. I love how his story differs from most by building a business first that's allowed him to continue to leverage into property. And I couldn't agree more that time is our most valuable asset. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. Even if you're interested into getting into the property sector, let's have a chat. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey, learn from the mistakes that we have made, and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing a story, you can go to jordandeong.com/podcast, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you want to see what else I'm up to, you can go to YouTube and type in Jordan de Jong, where you'll find the Smashed Avo Property podcast being hosted on YouTube and plenty of other content that I'm putting out consistently. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.